European Union as a target of pressure. The Great Game focuses on the European Union summit and the discussion of financial support for Ukraine. However, formally, this news event is used as the basis for a broader interpretative construct, the goal of which is to present the European Union as a politically degenerate, morally bankrupt, and strategically helpless entity, whose actions are reduced to a struggle for resources and prolonging its own political survival. 1. Shifting the agenda from social issues to money for Ukraine. The logic of the plot is built on a sharp juxtaposition of two themes: protests by European farmers and the discussion of funding for Ukraine. Within this construct, the farmers' protests serve an illustrative rather than an informative function. They serve as proof that the EU has supposedly lost touch with its own population. The argument is built on a simple cause and effect diagram. Europe has real social problems. European elites ignore them. They are instead focused on finding funds for Ukraine. Thus, support for Ukraine is interpreted as antagonistic to the interests of European citizens, and any summit decisions are labelled in advance as antisocial and out of touch with reality. We read today's Western newspapers and their headlines. Putin called European leaders little pigs. Well, of course, they were talking about piglets, as Putin said, but naturally, all foreign language publications were generally perplexed as to how to translate the word pigs. So here's Euronews. European pigs wanted to profit from Russia's collapse, Putin declared. That's the title of the article. Politics. Putin called European leaders little pigs. Putin predicts that the European pigs who support Ukraine will lose power. Well, I must say, yes, that's an elliptical translation. Putin, the European leader, are little pigs who will be replaced. Well, you can only marvel at the richness of the Russian language. You know, a piglet, I've known this for a long time. My grandmother told me so. Well, the meaning is sort of like that, a small, slender piglet. This isn't a piglet anymore. It's not a piglet, but it's not yet a full-grown boar or hog, but rather a minor who doesn't yet understand everything. So, of course, they couldn't have included that subtlety, that nuance. It's just a small pig or something completely different. 2. Russian assets as a central symbol of conflict. The key semantic point of the passage is the topic of frozen Russian assets. They are presented not as the subject of a complex legal and political debate, but as a symbol of the EU's moral decay. What's important is not the fact that financial instruments are being discussed, but how it is interpreted. Confiscation or use of assets is called theft. Any alternative mechanisms, loans, credits, budget financing, are interpreted as a forced concession out of fear of consequences. The legal arguments of European leaders are presented as a cover for selfish goals. This is a typical strategy of moral reduction, in which complex institutional decisions are reduced to a simple ethical accusation. As a result, the EU is delegitimized not only as a political, but also as a legal entity. 3. The division of Europe as evidence of its weakness. Special attention is given to the positions of Hungary, Belgium, and several other countries. However, internal disagreements within the EU are interpreted not as a normal element of multilateralism, but as a sign of systemic disintegration. Here, a strategy of generalizing conclusions is used. If there is no unanimity, then the Union is not working. If states refuse to participate in financing schemes, then trust is destroyed. If discussions drag on, then Europe is paralyzed. Even references to the need to comply with laws and protect financial stability are presented as a sign of weakness, not responsibility. Thus, any scenario, both active action and a refusal to take it, is interpreted as confirmation of the EU's crisis. 4. Europe as an object of US manipulation. The recurring theme of the fragment is the idea that Europe is acting under pressure from the United States. The US is presented in a dual manner. On the one hand, as a source of pressure, pushing Europe towards risky decisions. On the other hand, as an actor that supposedly warns the EU not to violate international law. 5. Ukraine as an instrument, not an end. It is significant that in this passage, Ukraine is practically devoid of any agency of its own. Financing Ukraine is discussed not in terms of its needs or a strategy for exiting the conflict, but as a tool for the survival of European elites. Support for Kyiv is interpreted as a way to buy another year or two of political life, a mechanism for delaying internal crises in the EU, a form of redistribution of resources in favour of ruling groups. Thus, Ukraine ceases to be an independent participant in international relations and is transformed into an expendable element of foreign policy.